Hey there, welcome to the Data Governance and Privacy Solutions webinar on Right to Know Request Handling Use Case with Axon, DPM, and IICS. I'm Brinda, hosting today's webinar. This session discusses the implementation process for loading privacy-related data into Axon and using Subject Registry created by DPM to enable process orchestration with IICS to automate the data collection needed for a data subject request, right to know request. The presenters for this session are David Gaffney and Vivek Duriraj. David is our senior principal working with the Informatica Professional Services team. Vivek was his manager for professional services in the Informatica Professional Services team. Before we start, here are some housekeeping tips. The webinar is for 1 hour that includes a 45 minutes webcast, and then we'll move over live to answer your questions for 15 minutes. All dial-in participants will be muted to enable the speakers to present without interruptions. Your questions can be submitted through the Q&A section, and we'll be addressing them to the end of the presentation. The webinars will be recorded and will be available in the Informatica Support YouTube channel and the Success portal. The link will be emailed to you as well. Please set aside some time to complete the post-webinar survey and provide your feedback and suggestions for upcoming topics for our webinars. The Data Governance and Privacy Solutions webinars are a webinar series as part of the Informatica Success portal. The Success portal is a micro-learning platform that offers free and unlimited learning to all registered users. The Success portal lists your success offerings, your customer success manager information, bookings available in the Ask an Expert session, and customized recommendation and content. Over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Brinda. So jumping right in, here's the agenda we're going to go through today. We're initially going to start looking at a use case decomposition, and this is where we break down the core requirements for managing privacy in an organization. Then we'll go through and look at the foundational elements of a data privacy program, so the personas that are involved, the systems, and the processes. Then we'll go through just a couple examples of a day in the life of a compliance analyst, a governance analyst, et cetera, just to give you a sense of how you interact with the Informatica tool set as you go through that. Then Vivek's going to go through a little more of a technical walkthrough of the core architecture, the operating model for Axon, Data Privacy Manager, IICS, and then some more detailed day in the life flows from a technical perspective, as well as a demo. So to give you a sense of how we break down the business problems, you may have seen this in our previous webinar that we did a couple weeks ago, also a Tech Tuesday, Tech Thursday flow that we went through. The idea is to really start with the business outcome that you're looking at. And in this case, it is being compliance with compliance regulations, CCPA, GDPR, et cetera. They all fall into the same bucket. But what you do is you take the business problem that is getting in the way of that outcome and look at the data, the systems, and all the way down to the core attributes that are driving that information. I'm going through this quickly because I'm going to go through more of a detailed flow in the next slide. Also, depending on this, are KPIs as well as specific metrics from an organizational perspective that you're looking to manage, which are then governed by rules, all of it linking back to the core data attributes that you're managing. So let's go through a detailed example for CCPA and compliance. So here's an example looking at a DSAR request. So data subject access requests, starting with the business outcome. So what we want to be is in compliance with a right to know requirement that CCPA, GDPR, PIPEDA, other state, other national rules that have been built to follow. What you have to do in these requests is provide the consumer with what personal information you have about them, where it's stored, what business purpose it's for, and also who it's been shared with or sold to. Because a lot of times you're looking at collecting personal information. If you're a retailer, you may share it with a marketing organization, et cetera. You have to be able to trace all of that. The business problem is many companies don't have a single view of where that information lives, where it's stored, or where it went after it was sold. And this makes it very difficult to complete this request and do it satisfactorily, not only accurately, but within the 45 days, 45 days allotted to respond to this request. So the challenge is going to be getting at where that information lives. So critical data elements, they are components of customer records, they live in product and services records, they might be biometric information, such if you have a fingerprint scan, retinal scan, things like that about an individual. Education information, you may ask that as part of an initial survey to the customer. You may have salary, other financial information such as credit cards, or other things that fed into, let's say, getting credit for a purchase, etc. All of these things would qualify under that DSAR type request. Where does it live? Probably data warehouse, managed in a master data management system. Most organizations have a single view of the customer type of application, so MDM may hold that information. And then many transactional systems. So it could be, if you're a consumer products company, these could be point of sale systems being fed to you from major retailers. It could be other systems as well. If you're a car dealer, if you sell engines, you sell airline tickets, all of these things are going to contain that kind of information. You'll have to break it down specific to your industry to understand where that information lives. The data sets then within these systems, customer master, customer data sets, encounter history, so lifetime of a customer, their purchase history, maybe service history for things like a car dealer, a healthcare provider, or something like that, as well as the customer service application. So if you have a call center application you're using to work with customers and reach out to them, very likely it has a lot of identifying information about a customer, as well as things that you need to protect, so personal data, identity information. Attributes then are within those data sets, so first name, last name, location information, gender, and then things that link back to the person, so product ID, a sale record, maybe a contract. All of these things play into a response to that, as well as other requirements such as a right to be forgotten that we'll talk about later. Some KPIs that you'll be looking to measure part of this process are reducing the time to collect the data, degree of automation that you can support. So if you can very quickly collect all this information without manual intervention, that's going to be critical. And of course, accuracy. You don't want to be retrieving the wrong records for an individual. That can feed into one of these metrics. So retrieval errors, maybe pulling in Joe Smith versus Jane Smith, things like that. And then also looking at what I mentioned before as far as automation. So an RPA target of 80%, not having to have manual intervention if you can, and reducing that response time, because that can feed into fines and sanctions if you are slow in responding. And it's a similar problem to an e-discovery response, in that there is a time to it. You have to be able to respond within a particular period so that you can show you're compliant. Then you have rules that are going to be baked into this. So these are going to be mapped to the attributes themselves, but looking at things like a quality scorecard, making sure I'm retrieving quality information, that I have the appropriate privacy regulatory policy assigned to items, so a PII policy, a HIPAA policy, et cetera, so I know I'm linking to the right information. And then retention policies are critical in this case, because you may have a business need to collect information to hold information for 7 years for an individual, and once that period expires, you should expunge that data when it no longer has a business purpose. So that's going to be critical as well. As we've executed on these projects over the past several years, we've started to build out what we call our Data Governance Privacy Foundation. And this is really looking at the activities you have to perform to really build a solid foundation. I'm also going to match it to particular parts of our platform within this as well, so you can get an understanding of how Axon, EDC, DPM, et cetera, feed into this process. So first thing you have to do is really understand how you process personal data. So understanding managed governance policies, privacy policies, et cetera, that are feeding into these rules such as PII, PCI, HIPAA, PIPEDA, and all of them that feed into these. And so it's really how the organization manages and processes that personal data. And Axon is a big help with that because it is your business-centric glossary. You need to map and locate your personal information. So discover and understand what is personal data, what is sensitive data. So you need to have visibility across all your platforms and data types where they are. And the Digital Privacy Manager component really helps with this because it's looking at patterns and matching and identifying where that personal information lives across the enterprise. Also coordinating with a system like EDC, the Enterprise Data Catalog. We need to be able to link people to their personal data. So understanding that David Gaffney bought a particular item at Target on a particular day, something you'll need to track. In other cases, you may have a retail organization may collect information about sales patterns and so on, but de-identify that information and remove names or anything that can identify it back to an actual purchaser. Those things are okay. You can keep those because it is a business purpose without mapping it to an individual, and you can't actually trace it back. But you do need to index the entities of the identities of individuals back to their information. As you see, looking at things like our Customer 360, Data Privacy Manager, et cetera, are key components in managing this information. Then we need to understand that data risk. So risk analysis, what is, a first name, last name are obviously high risk or high sensitivity information. Just a city on its own may not be, but that in combination with my name then becomes a piece of personal data that you need to manage. And again, the Data Privacy Manager is really what's looking at that and the patterns that link them together. The subject rights, the consents, so being able to track how people are opting in, saying, yes, you can store cookies on my computer, these sorts of things. We have to be able to track that information as well because this is a key part of compliance with CCPA especially, but also many of the new state laws that are coming out as well. And you have to be able to respond to the requests and indicate when consent was given or not. And then finally, being able to communicate and track audit readiness. So being able to show back to the regulators that we are in compliance, be able to track that information, be able to look at how long it took me to respond to a particular request. Maybe in the early days of compliance, it's taking me 40 days and we're at risk of being non-compliant, but then over the next several months, we get better at it and that SLA can drop down to 10, 15 days or less in order to support a response. So we need to be able to measure that information as well in order to be compliant with all these requests going forward. Okay, so that's the foundation. So how does this get done? First of all, we need to look at the teams and personas that play a role in this. And as you see, as the slide build, it takes a village. So there's a lot of different individuals that are going to be involved in managing the data privacy program, executing on the program, making sure it's compliant, et cetera. And so as you see, certainly at the top with the compliance area, so legal, information, cybersecurity, these folks are putting policies against what we need to implement in the systems themselves. You have technical roles like enterprise architecture that are helping to define secure systems and making sure we have chain of custody as data moves through an application. You have a stewardship perspective of consumer data and understanding where that information lives in the cloud. So if you've got information on-prem, that's one way to manage it. If you've got it in an as a service application in a cloud provider, you have different controls you need to place on that information and of course, agreements that you have with your data owners that live outside your organization. So as you see, there's a huge amount of coordination that needs to happen to bring all of this together. Here at the bottom, we have website management and maintenance, web link requests. So these are, again, when you're putting out an offer, putting out information on a website, people are required to click that they consent to you managing their information or not. Either way, you have to track that because that is going to come in a consent request and a right to be forgotten request later on. You have other components as well, such as the business processes and making sure they're solid as you walk through these applications, so you're making sure to meet the right requirements. All of these have to work together. Every one of these roles has a job to do within this in order to be compliant with the regulations. Okay, so we're going to go through some use cases now, and some of the individuals from the circle that we just saw and how they participate in the application and the program in being able to support these specific requirements for CCPA. So here we've got Susan, the governance analyst, and so she has a specific set of activities she needs to perform to do sensitive data discovery and tagging. Prior to this, we really have to have some of that foundation we discussed earlier. So well understood data domains, subject registry, the key metadata that we're using for classification of personal private information, CCPA policy relevant information. So some of the flow we see here is really looking at gap analysis, understanding data domains, custom attributes, classification policies for system, being able to configure an enterprise data catalog resource so that we're able to scan and discover information within a technical resource. And this may be a database, it may be an application where we're storing customer information, any sort of information we need to scan and index and really understand the metadata. So building that out, curating that metadata content in EDC so we understand the business meaning of particular information, capturing the lineage and relationships. So we know that, let's say we're doing a consumer dashboard, that we've got point of sale information feeding a data mart, which then feeds Tableau as a dashboard. So being able to trace that lineage all the way through is going to be critical, because all those landing places are potentials for places to store and discover data later on. The data privacy manager then is looking at that information as well in place to see where is sensitive information captured, where is a pattern that looks like social security number or an address or gender, things like that against a customer record. These are all in things we need to capture, and that Susan, as a governance analyst, is actually walking through using the product stack to understand that. We'll need to look at those data stores where information was discovered, validate the findings, make sure we didn't have false positives, and if we did, training the system to recognize that that particular 9-digit number in that context was actually a bank account and not a social security number. These are the sorts of things that a governance analyst may be doing in the applications. Reviewing that dashboard, understanding the risk scores, and then understanding where issues might occur. And so this is really that final component of updating Digital Privacy Manager so that we understand, or Data Privacy Manager, so we understand where that information lives, but also being able to tweak the application to do it better the next time and sort of learn as we go. The results then should be we're improving the ability to capture this information, to discover where it lives, fine-tuning, improving those definitions, and having much higher confidence in our risk scores going forward. The second flow here is for Ellen, the compliance manager. So this is now preparing a DSAR request, and so, or fulfilling it. And so what this individual may do is really validate that subject, validate that it is a prior customer of ours that we need to investigate. It is a valid request, and it's not spam or some other source that we don't believe in. So building out that request database to say, okay, we've got a new request from David Gaffney. We've got 45 days to comply. We need to capture all the information that we're managing about this person. The automation comes in then, and typically looking at that orchestration process to retrieve the data from a subject registry using Data Privacy Manager. So this is finding out, using the fine-tuned results that we managed in the prior use case, training the system so that we are able to capture and have high confidence that we're retrieving the right information from the right data sources. We have to execute system APIs to retrieve this information, to retrieve the purpose for it, retrieve any information from third parties. All of this is related to looking at our IICS cloud platform as well as Axon for understanding the policy and how it relates to them. Then we would look to compile all this information to update the request database to say, okay, we found 400 meg of information about this person, from prior purchases to images of products he bought or whatever that may be, to fulfill that request, and then run that reporting process to get it back to the customer and say, we're in compliance, we met the target, send the response back so we show we are in compliance. Similarly to the other process, we have to have the subject registry predefined. We have to have the ability to track and track the status of this information as we go through it. And we have to have the integration back to the applications that actually hold the information. So to be able to dispatch these requests to a particular application, a sales database, to say, I'm collecting the appropriate information for this subject. The result is hopefully a complete collection. So all the information, what it's being used for, when it was collected, we need to report that back to the requester. We want to have an efficient and compliant response time. And so yes, be in compliance, be able to show our capability in this area, and be able to repeat it. Now, these are just a couple use cases we're showing. In reality, the full compliance has a very broad reach in that you have to be able to authenticate those requesters. Just to describe a few, we have to do the consent management, so be able to track when someone said, yes, you may use my information until I say opt out. You have to have appropriate encryption of things like credit card numbers, social security numbers, other things that are personal information that should be locked down in the event of a breach. You have to be able to look at other things like out of scope. Is there other data movement that was not captured? And so if we did push information off to a third-party data warehouse, are we able to track that? And then one of the key ones here is this right to be forgotten. So a follow-up request to the DSAR might be myself saying to your organization, you need to forget everything about me. We no longer have a business relationship, and thereby you should have to delete anything that can be identified back to me. So each one of these is a use case of its own, is a pattern of its own that we'll have to look at as you build out your program. So now we're getting into how to make it happen. And so the overall roadmap process is pretty simple, straightforward, is looking at identifying, prioritizing the core capabilities you want to support them with the appropriate technology to achieve the business outcomes. And so just some quick checkpoints here about what we're looking to manage. So the capabilities you have to have are business process information or business processes that manage that information, the systems that support the processes, the ability to fulfill the subject access requests, being able to track things like privacy breach thresholds and workflows for when that does happen, deletion requests, so the right to be forgotten, et cetera. These are all core capabilities we need to support to have a compliant program. The technology support then, so we've talked a bit about the applications and the Informatica stack that all play a different role in this. Enterprise data catalog for metadata management of your core data, Axon for policy management, managing workflows, regulatory impact, data privacy manager for overall security, subject registry, and so on. And so we've got a number of different applications that we need in place that all play a different role. Not that you need to have the entire stack on day one, but all of these things have a different capability to them and overlap with each other from a data sharing and from perspective that really helps support the whole program. So test data management is actually a key one for having that data masking capability. And so looking at, we want to be able to test out our privacy capabilities in test before bringing it to production. So that's the ability to do data masking and scrubbing, obfuscating information so that we aren't able to identify information back to an individual. And then we have our cloud integration strategy with IICS, which is really orchestrating that information across multiple applications in the cloud to have that single view of a subject. The goals then, outcomes. So discover, classify all regulatory impacted information, being able to map an inventory, index that information by an individual, operationalize those data flows so that we can do things more automated and be able to track end to end how that works, and integrate those workflows so that we have, look back a couple slides ago, being able to manage from a robotic process automation perspective, being able to track information all the way through without a lot of manual intervention. And then finally, some just basic best practices for how you go about this, and then I'll hand it off to Vivek, is looking at when we execute a pilot project or rolling into a new domain within an organization, you do have basic capabilities that you communicate at the kickoff. Like all those folks that may be involved in this first round is enlist their participation, communicate with them, look at the enablement activities that they're going to need to be able to effectively interact with the products. So will they need Axon plus DPM plus EDC? What kind of information are they going to need to do their job as a compliance steward or a data officer? Executing the activity. And so typically we'll have a core team helping them with this capability right at first. And then we sort of step back a little bit, you know, and sort of teach the fish and then let those folks run it on their own as they take on that role. Look for compliance standards, what we're actually looking to measure for the individuals as far as SLAs, completeness of activities, being able to run metrics against the activities that we're performing across the toolkit so that we can better assess how well it's working. And the key thing is capture this information and then feed it back so we roll into the next business area, we do it more efficiently, and we can use this cycle here as our onboarding activity for new stewards to bring them up to speed on the process and make sure we've got an efficient rollout over a long set of years. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Vivek.
Thanks, David. My name is Vivek Doriraj. I'm a senior manager with Informatica Professional Services, and I've been with the company for close to 10 years now. So in the next 15 to 20 minutes, we will discuss the primary flows in any data privacy initiative. With the right strategy, agility doesn't have to be compromised in the name of privacy. The key to a successful data privacy implementation is to understand that the regulations that have been published need to be translated to actionable policies for an organization. These policies help the organization achieve their privacy goals and be compliant as per the regulations. The translation of the regulations to policies are typically determined by the legal teams, but once the policies are defined, it is critical that they are made available in Axon for the various teams to understand and consume. These policies can be associated to various facets and assets in Axon like systems and data sets so that the assets can be governed as per the regulatory needs. Also, it is important that appropriate stakeholder matrix is defined and responsibilities are assigned to ensure the critical elements are secured and workflows are defined for any privacy related requests like data subject access requests that come from the data privacy office. Without the appropriate workflows defined, it will become difficult to understand the various steps in the process to service a verifiable consumer data subject access request. It can be for deletion or for obfuscation. At a high level, there are typically two types of actions that can be performed in any initiative. So there is a contributor or a producer flow, and there is a consumer flow. Sometimes we have seen new customers struggling with how to contribute content and where to start and how to start and what to create and in which order. So the next set of slides provides the execution flows from a contributor and from a consumer perspective. The producer flow helps in understanding the products that are involved, what assets are typically created, and the personas needed for the same. The producer can be anyone who contributes to asset creation that can help with the privacy governance. This helps in making sure the appropriate steps have been initiated and the system can service any privacy request. The consumer is someone who uses the assets to make an informed decision or to service a data privacy request. In this webinar, for the consumer flow, we will pick on a specific use case to explain the servicing of a data service request. Since the topic of data privacy is vast, we will have to set some boundaries so that we address it only within the scope of data governance, considering the time constraints. Identification of the rules, data elements, the systems, and the data sets in which the data elements reside, and the legal entities and the policies that govern them are the key concepts that we will focus on. From a contributor perspective, typically a data steward will create content in various facets in Axon by working in collaboration with the SMEs and the data privacy teams. The systems need to be defined, the interfaces between the systems need to be developed, and the policy definitions need to be created based on the inputs provided by the HR, legal, and the data privacy teams. For the systems that have been defined, the corresponding data sets and attributes need to be created. If there are outbound interfaces to third-party systems like external applications, external banks that either contribute or consume data, they need to be defined for data privacy request in Axon. After that, the category of terms need to be assigned to the attributes defined in Axon. Based on the stakeholder matrix developed, the stakeholders need to be assigned to various assets, and a consensus has to be reached as part of the curation and the approval process. Some of these steps can be turned into a single or multiple workflow, depending on the need to assign responsibility and for better cross-collaboration. The out-of-the-box workflows for the facets can be leveraged, or in some scenarios, new workflows might have to be created. If the organization already has some reusable approved content that can be curated with minimal effort, the bulk upload features in Axon can be leveraged for the same, and this can reduce typically the onboarding time for the facets in Axon. After the systems have been defined, the scanners or resources in EDC can be built for scanning and profiling the data stores. Data domains can be attached to the scanners for identifying the patterns. If the existing out-of-the-box data domains do not satisfy the scanning or the organization needs, custom data domains can be built and attached during the scanning process. As a best practice, it is always recommended to validate and curate the data domains inferred by the system. There could be scenarios where the inferred data domains might need to be curated, or the data domain rules have to be modified a bit to get more true positives as part of the scanning process. Once the scanning is complete, they are available in secured source. Create classification policy in secured source and group the data domains as per the different regulation needs like CCPA or GDPR. If the subject registry is established, validate the loaded data and take any appropriate action. The information for the subject registry can come from various sources like relational systems, flat files, PDFs, documents, etc. So after the curation process, by working with the data owners and the data stewards, tweak the rules and run the scans again for better match and accuracy. So for the consumer flow, we will take one particular use case. So in this particular consumer flow, we are looking at a DSR, a data subject request. In a typical consumer flow, a request is initiated by the data privacy office. The data privacy office determines if this is a relevant request and if all the information are provided in the request to identify the individual and to gather the necessary data. Once it has been validated, the next step is to identify the data stores and the relationships between them to resolve the identities and map the data sources to the person. Once the data and data sources are identified, we need to review the category of personal information in Axon and look at the definitions defined at the attribute level for the data sets in the system. The Axon Quick Look feature can also be used for quickly looking up any definitions, either from an email or from any desktop application, for doing a quick search and for an easier understanding. It also provides additional information on who the stakeholder is for that particular definition, what policies are applied, etc. But if we want to get more context, it is better to log into the Axon governance application. If there are legal entities tied to the systems, we need to be aware of that. Also, check if there are any third parties that are tied to the systems, because they may need to be identifiable if data has to be sent for a particular person. If it is not appropriate to seek consent or consent cannot be obtained from the third-party systems, create a workflow process to make sure it is reasonable to disclose the third-party information without consent, or whether any steps can be taken to remove the third-party data as part of the request. Make sure the appropriate workflows are triggered to get any needed consent and the necessary approval from the data owners and the stakeholders. The next step is to orchestrate the data provisioning process. For customers who already have Informatica Intelligent Cloud Services or IICS, they can take advantage of the API management routines in IICS and orchestrate the data provisioning by building application interfaces in ICAI module in IICS. The APIs hosted in IICS can be called for data provisioning. But if you don't have access to IICS, that is still fine. There will be some different technology that might already be leveraged by the organization instead of IICS, and that can be used for data provisioning too. Once the data is provisioned, it is sent to the data privacy office, and they can perform the necessary audits like making sure no third-party data is sent without their explicit consent. The privacy teams will then follow up and complete the data subject request workflow process. In scenarios where the organization has deployed Informatica Master Data Management Solution for customer data, there will already be a golden copy of the customer data. So that can also be leveraged in addition to secure at source for data provisioning. So for the next 5 to 8 minutes, let's quickly switch over for a short demo. So in this demo, we will look at a data subject request that can be serviced using the Informatica Data Governance and Privacy suite of products. So I'll log into Axon. And once you log in, when we get a DSAR request from a data privacy team, we can go to the data governance application. In this case, it's Axon, and look for the definition for a business term. So if I go to search, and when I click on the glossary, I can look at either search for a term, or I can go by specific business terms. So in this case, I would want to look at party data. And when I click on it, I can look at the hierarchy for the definition, and it gives a full view of what this definition means. I can also go to the dashboard view. So if I go back to the home screen, and if I already have a dashboard created for a regulation like CCPA, I can look at the metrics that I'm interested in for tracking, like data governance process and quality metrics and approvals and workflows. And these are custom dashboards. So these dashboards are completely customizable and additional widgets can be added as necessary. Also, these dashboards can be shared with the team who are working on the same initiative in parallel, so that they can get a single comprehensive view of the metrics that I'm looking at. If any other initiatives are also happening in parallel, additional dashboards can be created and tailored toward that particular initiative. To get more details for better tracking, we can also go and search in the application. If I'm looking at a certain policy, I can apply that policy by searching for, let's say if I'm looking for a CCPA policy, I can search for the policy here. And once I apply the filter, all the other systems and the data sets that are governed by are also filtered. So I can navigate between these between the different facets here. I can go to data sets, I can look at all the data sets that are governed by the policy, the systems in which they are in, and also how they are related to each other. In addition to this, because of the EDC integration with Axon, I can also look at the physical fields and how it relates back to the attributes defined as part of the data governance. This view provides the underlying technical data stores that have been scanned in EDC. If we do not have data governance solution deployed, gathering this level of technical information can be painstakingly slow, and we'll have to collaborate with various teams. We'll have to work with various teams and systems because each of these attributes could be in different systems, and we'll have to collect them all manually, which can be time consuming. With the automation through Claire, it is easier to collect all the technical assets and understand the lineage and data domains much faster, as the scanning identifies wherever a specific data set sits and can automatically associate them or recommend the associations to the governance team, who can then accept or reject the recommendations as part of the curation process. This way, this list can be built much quicker than doing it manually. And also the information is kept up to date as the scanners can be scheduled to run and bring in the latest changes. It also provides an overview of the business value information of a technical asset because the technical fields are linked to the attributes that we have defined in Axon. We can start looking from a data set and look at the policy that is tied to it, or we can start from a policy and look at the technical information that relates to it, as we did in this demo. In addition to how the systems are related to each other, if I want to understand the relationships, I can click on a system to which a policy is assigned, and then I can go to the map feature in Axon and look at the systems that are related to this particular system. We can add different overlays to understand the relationships better. There are a number of overlays that are available. So if I have to start with a certain overlay, I can start with the data privacy one, and it shows the systems that were involved in this process. And in case of a data privacy overlay, it shows the protection and the sensitivity levels of different systems that have been scanned. Some of these scans would be done by a secure at source. With this overlay, it helps in understanding the systems that need to be scanned that have not been done before. And if there are gaps, we need to work with the privacy teams to take appropriate action for scanning those systems. I can, if I want to change the overlay, I can also apply a policy overlay to understand what policy is applied on each of these systems. Once I have identified all the data stores, the relationships, and the policies that govern them, I can go to Secure at Source to understand any violation of policies or to look at the subject registry for a DSAR. So in Secure at Source, we can look at the different classification policies. And if I want to look at CCPA, I can look at the policies and the various data domains that are related to the CCPA policy. So this is where we have defined the policy and the type of data that we are looking for, the sensitivity, the rules, the risk that we want to apply to the scan, and gather the necessary information. In Secure Source, we can also scan and link the information collected back to the data subjects. So in case of looking for a specific person, I can go to Subject Registry and I can search by their name and issue a query. So if there is a match, I can drill down further and understand a little bit more on where the information is stored. So if a customer has filed a data subject access request, I can find all his information in a single place. So I can drill down further in the data stores, and I can look at what data store holds what type of information about the subject. And as I mentioned before, these data stores can be anything from a relational data store to a structured or an unstructured file. Typically, gathering this level of detail about a subject is a time-consuming process, and it involves coordination across multiple teams and departments in the organization. So it will take a while to figure out by calling each one of the data stewards or data owners, put in a request, make them understand what you're looking for, and they have to collect all this information and send it back. This is even assuming that they have all of this properly documented for someone to refer and put in the request to the appropriate stakeholders. So once we look at the data for a subject, we can also take action on it. So we can create a DSAR report, and the report gets generated, or we can export the data in a file format. Additionally, once the data is generated, so probably you'll have to figure out what are all the third-party systems that are involved, and if the data from those systems need to be collected before the finalized data is about the subject is sent back to the data privacy team. So that is where you'll have to look at Axon and then see what are the third-party systems that are tied to the data store that we have scanned, and gather the necessary information. And you can do the orchestration, as I said before, with IICS for the data provisioning by consolidating the data from the DSAR report generated in secure source along with the third-party data. We can also do other activities in secure source if we think the data is not secure, by applying protection rules and applying masking. But those are follow-on activities. But at a high level, if you get a DSAR request, so this is the flow that you can look at to gather all the information from a single place and send it back to your data privacy teams. So this concludes the demo. I'll hand it over to my colleague, David now. Thanks.
So thanks for that. Just wanted to close out with a couple tools and techniques that we use to manage these types of projects when we implement them. A couple examples here. We always build out a business roadmap and a technology roadmap as part of the ability to roll out CCPA compliance, other governance-related efforts, governance and privacy. And so what we'll often do is build out kind of a good, better, best model of our business capabilities and looking at what we can accomplish first as far as specific capabilities, and then how that rolls into the overall roadmap moving into multiple years. Similarly, we have the same capabilities aligned with what that looks like from a technology perspective. So initially just standing up basic applications and then rolling in new domains, new capabilities, new data sources, et cetera, as we go forward. So it's key to have both of these in alignment. The goal is to really build out a 2-year track, because that's really as far as you can look ahead. And then you want to be able to have a longer term view, but also being able to adapt to changes in regulations, new regulations that are coming out and being revised over time. From an Axon perspective, we look at building out the facet model in Axon, because this is really what's adding the business value. And so the key facets being the technical facets like system, data set, attribute, data quality, but then also looking at within the glossary, within regulation and policy, and how those map to specific capabilities we want to support in those consumer and producer use cases. And so we'll build out a facet model to really understand the interaction among these, and then also look at customizing the model itself and how you preload information into Axon so that you're able to capture your own organizational structures, business glossaries, and again, these technical facets that are really going to support the use cases going forward. So just a little preview, but these are some of the tools that you'll need to have in the toolbox to be able to execute on these projects going forward. With that, I'm going to hand it over to the panel to answer the questions that have been coming in. And so Poonam Gulati, Jason Beard, and Jaideep Singh.
This webcast has reached the maximum number of presenters.